I'm not sure if I'm going to be doing Final Fantasy or not. Maybe. Maybe not. I'm not sure. Do I have it operational on Twitter? Yes, I do. I think I have it on YouTube as well. But I gotta open up YouTube. I haven't done this before, really. Well, very little. Almost none. Maybe slightly. Let me see if... Oh, okay. Right. Okay. So I am popping up here on... Oh, okay. I will pull up chat on both in a kind of crude way. Okay, yeah. Does it have a watermark or does it not have a watermark? If it doesn't have a watermark, my problem is solved. Okay, basically. Yeah. Does it have a watermark or does it not have a watermark? Oops. If it does, double audio there. Okay. How do I change the title of the stream? Okay, yes, I can do that. Have I gotten messages? Okay, I may have had someone joining me. Maybe. Yeah, so I am actually recently going through Wolfhart Pannenberg's excellent systematic theology. It's a Lutheran systematic theology. And he says some interesting things about... Yeah, like I said, I don't know what I'm doing here. So I'm not... I should have... No, okay. Whatever you call it. Highlights. And he was talking about open theism. Unique character. So actually, what's his name? Alfred North Whitehead. He's an interest of mine. I may get to reading him at some point. Oh, hi. Actually, I'm streaming. You don't have to talk. I just didn't put two and two together. So if you want to talk, you can. But it's going to be on the internet.
Oh, good. I get to be famous.
I don't really have a specific topic for this stream or anything. I'm just goofing around. I'm using right now. If you check Twitter or YouTube, you'll find me. And I believe that the watermark isn't there. Which is good, by the way.
Is that using Restream?
Yes, and there's no watermark that I can see. And I think the reason for that is I'm not using the website directly, so I may have the problem partially resolved. Partially resolved, basically. Right. The basics of what Wolfhart Pannenberg is getting here is, well, I'll just read some to you. An attempt has been made to justify Whitehead's version of the relation between God and the world by pointing out the formula creation out of nothing is post-biblical, and that the idea of continuous creation does better justice to the biblical witness, which I believe in some fashion, by the way. I do believe in continuous creation. As regards the formula, of course, me reading. Continuous creation comes from an even later period. Then does creation out of nothing. So basically, the short version there is that, well, creation out of nothing is post-biblical, allegedly. I would argue with that, but allegedly. Well, it's literally an older doctrine than continuous creation. So to draw sort of process theological conclusions out of that is silly. The historical argument is non-factual, basically. It's just incorrect. It also presupposes the strict concept of creation out of nothing by seeing in God's preservation its continuation. For this reason, we cannot set the two formulas in antithesis to one another. So in other words, process theologians will want to characterize continuous creation as contradictory to God's original creation. Creation out of nothing is what I mean specifically. So they want to contrast continuous creation with creation out of nothing, creation ex nihilo. Well, let me add some comments. The Genesis account does not begin with, let's see here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So you have the creation account here beginning partway through the creation account. I've not really done this. Open Theism and randomness. Alright. Thankfully this was done quickly, and then I can still edit stuff. Alright, now, let me check YouTube. Yeah, okay, it changed. That's good. That's useful. Well, I found my solution. I found my streaming solution, thank the Lord. It does begin here at halfway through or partway through the creation account, because God clearly has created the primordial sea, the primordial waters or ocean, before this creation, this creative act, which he is separating the light from the dark and organizing the primordial waters, presumably. I saw a video by Anthony, let me see here. Anthony Rogers? Let me pull it up. Because apparently Tovia Singer actually believes that water is co-eternal with God, which sounds more like Platonic creation.
Attacks and denounces the Christian doctrine of the Trinity as a form of pagan polytheism, a belief in a plurality of gods or eternally existing entities. However, not only is it not the case now, never has been the case, and by the grace of God, never will be the case, that Christians believe in a plurality of eternal entities. Tovia Singer does, and I can prove it.
Sorry for the speed.
In his frequent attacks on the doctrine of the Trinity, Tovia proceeds from first miscasting it as a form of polytheism to then refuting and or ridiculing his own misrepresentation. In doing this, he's simultaneously doing two things. Number one, he's unwittingly indicating his own lack of confidence in his ability to refute what Christians actually believe. If he thought he could refute us and could do so easily, and if he had integrity, he wouldn't have to resort to the tactic of misrepresentation. But number two, he's also acknowledging that the Hebrew Scriptures stridently, uniformly, and clearly denounce all polytheism and affirm the existence of only one God. However, this isn't Tovia's actual position. It's his position when he wants to refute his made-up version of Christianity, but his actual position actually countenances a plurality of eternal entities. In addition to his putative deity, Tovia says there is at least one other eternal reality, and who knows what else might exist in his system that he hasn't mentioned. But according to Tovia, besides God, water has always existed.
Water always existed. It's an interesting thing that water was never created, or it's completely primordial.
So, according to Tovia, God is...
Yeah, and that sounds like Plato. It does not sound like because Plato believed in creation. Like Plato believed in creation, but he did not believe in creation ex nihilo. He believed that God and the primordial chaos or substance were co-eternal. So the craftsman organizes everything. And Tovia Singer is basically positing what Plato taught. Again, Plato is a creationist. He does not an emanationist. He does not believe God emanated eternally the universe or anything like that. He does believe God, he calls God, demiurge or craftsman, created the universe out of the substance. That's basically what Tovia Singer is positing here. That is not what we believe as Christians. The logically, it does not make sense. And for God to be ultimate, minimally, a co-eternal substance with God is incredibly dubious. Minimally. Technically speaking, there might be a way to make that work. You could have the only way this could work logically would be for the water to be emanated by God eternally, and that would be it. That's really weird, by the way. That's the only way to make it work, and I think it's pretty clear that we're supposed to believe the universe is created. Again, this is sort of a weird. I don't know if anyone's ever thought of this. They may have. It's just an idea that I'm trying to iron out what Tobias Singer's saying. But Tobias Singer's not a good person, though. He does misrepresent. He's full of baloney.
It's not the sole source of all extra-deical reality. There is something else that is co-eternal with his deity, but presumably is not co-essential with him, which means that he's affirming an actual polytheism. He's qualified the absoluteness of his God. God is not absolute after all. There's another thing that exists as co-evil or co-eternal with him. He is co-relative to another eternal thing. This is the very essence of polytheism. This is the essence of paganism. This is the epitome of what Tobias Singer loves to hate and loves to attack when he misrepresents Trinitarians as affirming an actual polytheism. Now, according to Tovia, this is consistent with what's found in the first several verses of Genesis, because in Genesis 1 through 3, it speaks of God in the beginning creating heaven and earth, proceeds to mention the Spirit of God brooding over the great deep or the surface of the waters, and then proceeds to mention God saying, "Let there be light." Since the mention of the great deep or the surface of the waters precedes God's statement, "Let there be light," Tovia reasons that water must have existed eternally.
In the third verse of the entire Torah, we're told how Hashem made the world. Vayomer Elohim yehi or, and God said, "Let there be light." Vayor. So how did Hashem create light? And remember, light, water always existed. It's an interesting thing that water was never created, or it's completely primordial. And in fact,
Primordial water has nothing to do with whether it's created or not. So there's no reason to assume it was uncreated. Again, the only way to even make that work with actual monotheism is to, well, monotheism is a spectrum, just as polytheism is it's complex, but to make it work in what we would believe as monotheists, as Christians, okay, to make that work, you would need to have God, again, God would have to eternally emanate the water, which I guess is fine, although it's very weird. I don't think there's any reason to believe that.
scientists know today that water does not come from this universe, does not come from this planet at all. So in the verse,
I don't know if that's true.
I'm just as a caveat, you see how the Torah is so accurate. Water was always there. At the end of verse 2, we see V'ruach Elohim.
The water is before the earth. Like, the water on the earth is, I think, when the earth was being formed, is before the earth in terms of mainstream science, okay. However, it not coming from the, what did he say? Did he say universe?
Does not come from this planet at all. And in fact, scientists know today that water does not come from this universe, does not come.
That may just be he may just be misspeaking. That's possible that he's misspeaking. I'm not sure, really.
From this planet at all. So in the
Because that doesn't sound like it makes any sense at all. What, did it come from another universe? Where'd the water come from?
verse, I'm just as a caveat, you see how the Torah is so accurate. Water was always there. At the end of verse 2, we see V'ruach Elohim merachefes al pnei hamayim, that the Spirit of Hashem hovered over the face of the waters. Now, whatever that means, waters are there. God's going to separate the waters, but water was always there.
Now, without getting into the complexities of the grammar here and why this just doesn't fly, there's an easy, clear, internal disconfirmation of this in the Hebrew Scriptures. In Proverbs 8, Solomon, speaking in the name of God's wisdom, and for the purposes of this video, it's not necessary to determine whether wisdom is simply a personification of God's essential and eternal attribute of wisdom or is an actual person, but the wisdom of God in Proverbs 8 speaks of always being there, and wisdom precedes all things, which include the great deep. The Lord possessed me the beginning of his way, before his deeds of long ago. From eternity I have been established, from the beginning, from before the world existed. When there were no deep oceans I was born, when there were no springs overflowing with water, before the mountains were set in place, before the hills I was born, before he made the earth and its fields, or the topsoil of the world, when he established the heavens I was there, when he marked out the horizon over the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above, when he secured the fountains of the deep, when he gave the sea his decree that the water should not pass over his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him as a master craftsman, and I was his delight day by day, rejoicing before him at all times, rejoicing in the habit.
That's a really good verse. Let me scroll back here a little bit. Proverbs 8. Yeah, that's excellent. I forgot about Proverbs 8.
Place before the hills.
Yeah, the master craftsman, right? So this is what. Let me go back to. I don't know if I can pull it up quickly, to be honest. I was looking at it on my phone. These highlights are taken from my phone, not from my computer. but he writes something that's very interesting and helpful. Let me see if I can find it. If I can't, it's not a problem. I can remember. I can go by memory. Okay. Well, I will explain what Wolfhart Pannenberg is saying here. Okay. Um, he's saying here. Yes, the Son is the origin of all that differs. Okay, here it is. The Son is the origin of all that differs from the Father, and therefore of the creature's independence. So basically, how this relates to this video is that this craftsman here, at the Father's side, that's of course Jesus, and the Son, the Father, the co-eternal, all things were made through him and for him and by him. And so, Jesus is the author of creation.
I was born. Before he made the earth and its field, or the topsoil of the world, when he established the heavens, I was there. When he marked out the horizon over the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above, when he secured the fountains of the deep, when he gave the sea his decree that the water should not pass over his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him as a master craftsman, and I was his delight day by day, rejoicing before him at all times, rejoicing in the habitable part of his earth, and delighting in its people. According to the wisdom of God in Proverbs 8, especially verse 24, the great deep has not always existed. The ocean depths, the
Okay, thank you, Anthony. I appreciate that. That helps.
waters have not always been. Verse 24, wisdom said, when there were no deep oceans, I was born. Here, wisdom uses the exact term found in Genesis 1:2. Wisdom tells us that Tobiah's other eternal reality is not so eternal after all. And after all, since this is wisdom talking, we also see that Tobiah is at variance with God's wisdom. Tobiah vaunts himself as an expert in the scriptures and as somebody who's holding forth the faith of the true God over against pagan polytheists. But at the end of the day, Tobiah is every bit the polytheist he pretends that others are. Tobiah affirms the very kind of polytheism found in all forms of ancient paganism, ancient pagan religions, ancient pagan philosophies, which affirm the existence of other things besides their putative deities. Tobiah is not the bastion of monotheism.
Let me see here. Let me see if my voice is up. Is it working? Yes, it is. Okay. So, I think I'm slightly. I don't totally agree with what Roger said there, because monotheism is a spectrum. Monotheism as a term did not exist until the 1600s, and when you look at pagan systems are, some are truly polytheistic. Others are questionably polytheistic, or they're not. They're technically not. The Inca, for example, had a highest creator god, Viracocha, and in some ways, it's actually easier for missionaries to interface with those people who have that structure. So, like pagan monotheism is a thing. Some are sort of monotheistic, not completely. Others are fully. The Stoics, the Platonists, and the Aristotelians are generally monotheistic. I was shocked to learn that even mainstream Hinduism, in a technical way, is monotheistic. Technically, even though it's super polytheistic as well. Because they have, I don't know, millions of gods. But the gods and the universe are all made up of the Brahman who created the universe. And it's possible this may require some future revision, because I don't know as much as I need to know. There's a minority school in Hinduism, or in Indian philosophy, called Dvaita. Advaita thinks all things are one and does not distinguish between the creator and the creature, whereas Dvaita does. Dvaita generally, to my knowledge, again, this is subject to revision upon further learning. But Dvaita elevates Vishnu to the highest god, as highest god, and says that God is distinct from creation, in a way that Advaita, all is one, or not dual, whereas Dvaita is dual. Dvaita in that way is closer to Christianity than mainstream, more popular mainstream Hinduism, because again, Indian religion is complicated. So let's see here. And the other thing is, you can have mysterious beliefs, And so, one thing Muslims will often believe, right? One thing Muslims very often will subscribe to Muslims is that the Quran, Kamalat Allah, Word of God, basically, is co-eternal with God. And that sounds, hey, okay, Root. Hey, Root. He's saying the waters are pre-existent. Yes, but he's saying that the waters are not created. They're eternal, basically. He didn't use the word eternal, but primordial waters had to have been created before the creation was completed. Like, the Bible does have the primordial waters, so God clearly created the primordial waters before he formed the primordial waters into the creation, basically. But Tovia is saying that they are literally uncreated, and that's a problem. The problem for monotheism. It's not. Thing is, when it comes to like the complexities of religion and philosophy and things like that, I don't know if it's as extremely incompatible with true monotheism as some people think it is, but it is But it is very problematic. It does create philosophical issues. Anyways, the thing is here, Tovia Singer probably has a way. I mean, I could be wrong because he is not a good person. He misrepresents us. He is intellectually dishonest. He is intellectually dishonest, but like he's a smart guy. And so my theory, my assumption, I don't know. I could look it up. I probably should. My assumption is he has an idea that justifies monotheism in his own head. Like he has a theory that makes this uncreated water work. And the way I would make that work is to make the water be eternally emanated from God. Just the water, though, nothing else. That's the only way that I could make that work. So I assume he has a way. You know, does it violate the spirit of maybe, you know, Unitarian Jewish monotheism? Probably. But it doesn't technically violate the letter, I would think. And so Muslims who believe that the Quran is co-eternal with Allah, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not monotheists. They are monotheists. We are monotheists. Some Muslims recognize that. Many do not. One of my closest friends is a Muslim. He's sort of a Muslim. Like he really is a monotheistic perennialist, and Islam is sort of he's also kind of like a Protestant Muslim. It's really weird. Like he wants to throw out the Hadith and reform Islam, and it's very personal for him. He wants to recover the original Islam, basically. And I actually disagree with Robert Spencer on some things about Islam. Robert Spencer does not properly acknowledge diversity in Islam. And don't get me wrong, like I am generally pro Robert Spencer. I'm not anti Robert Spencer. I have issues with some of the things that Robert Spencer says. He wants to oversimplify Islam and make it to be, it's all basically the only real version of Islam is violent, expansionist, Sunni Islam. And there's some truth to that statement. There is some truth to the statement. He's not wrong exactly, but he's not exactly correct either. Islam is far more diverse than he presents it. And here's the thing, right? Muslim apologists do the same thing. So anti-Islamic apologists will they will oversimplify Islam, and pro-Muslim, Muslim apologists, they will do the same in their case to defend the unity and accuracy of Islam. In the case of the Christian anti-Muslim apologists, to draw out internal contradictions and its bad characteristics that basically do. Islam does have internal doctrines and historical aspects and characteristics which generate bad behavior. I think that the bad behavior is exaggerated by internally in their own countries, but does it make them imperialistic? Absolutely it does. It makes them imperialistic. It makes them hostile in a way to Christianity that is almost unique. Similar with Judaism. Judaism and Islam are both Bible cults. They are both post-Christianity. Our religion, Christianity, is basically a refinement of ancient Judaism. It's a particular articulation of ancient Judaism with the ceremonial and ethnic elements modified or removed. You know, it's like this is another thing, right? Like, there's a great book, I recommend it. This book here, okay, Jewish Believers in Jesus, is excellent. It has a bunch of great okay, I'm a fan of Richard Bauckham. I don't know most of these names. Craig Evans is great. Richard Bauckham is great. Skaroon is great. He's written great essays in this book. And you will find in this book right here interesting information about Judaism. I'm going to tell you what I've learned about the history of Judaism through this book and others, so I'm amalgamating information. So after 70 AD, you have the destruction of the temple and a loss of the ceremonial system, so Judaism needs to reform itself, and you have diverse Judaisms. You have many sects and groups. There's going to be general convergence. Some of them were totally off the wall, but generally they were probably in the Orthodox direction, theologically Orthodox before Christ, basically. And after 70 AD, a great shift. For example, Rabbi Akiva, he actually believed in the two powers in heaven. So in ancient Judaism, and if you type in Judaism, you will on my account you will find a thread on Judaism. In fact, it should be in the highlights. You should check it out if you have time. Very short thread, does not take long to find. Actually, you know what? I'll pull it up here. So before I say anything more, Rabbi Akiva, who was one of the most important foundational fathers for rabbinic Judaism, actually subscribed to the two powers in heaven, and may have. It's possible that Akiva actually believed that Bar Kokhba, from the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 130s AD, in some way Bar Kokhba was divine. That is possible. There is a real possibility that is the case. It actually was much more successful than the first revolt in 66 to 74 AD. So successful, in fact, that 2 legions were had to be disbanded. The amount of casualties they took. In the day of... well, first of all, Jesus is calling them brood of vipers because when you are fighting against the Lord, you are an agent of Satan, right? So it's probably more general than... not the specificity here where the Pharisees are Talmudic heretics. They're not. Rabbinic Judaism hadn't developed yet. Some elements that was rolled into Rabbinic Judaism had been... but it was not Rabbinic Judaism proper. Historical Pharisees weren't heretics. They were binitarian, didn't question baptism in of itself. Yes, in the Synoptics, it was Mark or Matthew. The Pharisees, I think it was Matthew, actually. The Pharisees aren't arguing with baptism. They're arguing with the context of baptism. We get our churches... our churches come, to some extent, from pre-Christian synagogues. And when I say pre-Christian, like really... ancient Judaism and Israelite religion is, and I would say even a simplistic Noah-like religion that maybe Naaman had, because Naaman took soil from Israel. He recognized Yahweh was the true God. So I don't believe the covenant of the Old Testament is still... it's not refined, it's not perfect, they were saved by faith. Abraham was saved the same way we are. Naaman was saved the same way that Abraham was. Naaman was saved in the same way that David was. Faith in the Lord. And his promises, whatever way they understood that, whatever resolution they understood God's promises, that was what saved them. So what happened after 70 AD is that Judaism had to change. Fundamentally had to change. They had to center their practices around prayer and not relying on temple sacrifices, for one, but they needed to change their theology. And in that period of time in Second Temple Judaism, large numbers, and possibly the majority, this is according to Daniel Boyarin, who was an Orthodox Jewish scholar and rabbi, okay? Generally, he is not interested in doing Jewish apologetics, which is generally what most Jewish scholars do. Geza Vermes does this. I don't have much respect for Geza Vermes. Bart Ehrman does something similar, even though he's an atheist, kind of. They presume Unitarianism. According to Boyarin, and he's rephrasing Segal here, who wrote in the 70s, Alan Segal, there is significant evidence, uncovered in large part by Segal, that in the first century many, perhaps most, Jews held a binatarian doctrine of God. This Jewish doctrine was named minute by rabbis, meaning heresy, as an important part of the project of constructing Jewish orthodoxy as separate from Christianity. That's the short version. The tactics they used to do this, there was roughly three areas, and there may have been more. This is based on my own research, so it may require some refinement later on. In Judea, in Syria, and Mesopotamia, academic cliques of rabbis gathered together and basically started reformulating their religion and attempted to conquer all of the Jewish world, which they eventually succeeded over a period of centuries. They used tactics like delegitimizing the Septuagint, creating their own Greek editions. They did a good job, to be clear. They did do a good job at preserving the Old Testament, but they did make dishonest editorial decisions. Where there was a high Christological reading, here's a strategy that they would employ as textual scholars. If they have 5 high-quality manuscripts with minimal mistakes and have a high Christological reading, let's say, for example, in Psalm 22, in the original Hebrew, would say, my hands are being dug. They dig at my hands. The Septuagint says pierce. There is pierce or dig in the, more like dig in Hebrew, is present in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in Jerome's translation of the Old Testament directly from Hebrew into Latin. Anyways, they obscured the Old Testament text by, they would have multiple good quality manuscripts, one bad quality manuscript, and the bad quality manuscript had a lower Christology reading. Like, say, the lower Christology reading is the LEB translated this way: the lions are at my hands and feet. Well, if that were true, first of all, it's not true, but I don't think it's very likely to be true. I think the higher Christological reading is true. But if it were not, by inference, you can still say, well, they're at your hands and feet, they'd be biting them. They'd be tearing them with their claws. So your hands are getting pierced. It's just, you're saying the same thing, just less directly. So even then, by implication, the suffering servants, the character in Psalm 22's hands are still being pierced, by inference, minimally. Regardless, the high Christological reading is much more likely. We have evidence of that. And so the Masoretes, while they did a great job, they did make a handful of dishonest editorial decisions. And 2 examples that are very good. Okay, very good examples. Let me see if I can pull up I'll pull up 2 translations at the same time. Deuteronomy 32. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is his allotted heritage. Whereas in here it's going to say, he set the boundaries according to the number of the sons of Israel. Now that doesn't make sense, logically speaking. That was changed. It was done for ideological reasons, basically, to obscure maybe an alleged view of polytheism, even though it's not polytheism at all. You know, the divine council, these are all created beings. You can call them angels if you want. Angel is a catch-all in the New Testament. Rejoice with him, O heavens. Bow down to him, all gods. Whereas here it does not say that. Rejoice, O nations, with his people. This is more likely to be than the original. It makes more sense as an older recension, because the ideological focus is on debunking the power of the other gods more than anything. And later on, you have sort of like squeamish rabbis coming about. We have this problem now with guys at TMS seminary. Those guys love James White. James White, I think, is not a fan of this. He's wrong. Love him, but he's still wrong. He's right about soteriology, though. I'm with him on Calvinism. So they believed in a Godhead. It was very mainstream Judaism to believe in a Godhead. In fact, there's actually evidence of binatarianism. This is from an interesting book, the Genesis creation account in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I believe this book does find historical evidence for a young earth creation, or something similar to a young earth creation position in some ways. So, if my young earth creationist friends want to take a look at this book, I mean, you can. It might be helpful for your cause. The inclusion of the phrase, "and his Holy Spirit," in the context of the summary type recounting of creation appears to indicate some sort of role for the Holy Spirit in creation week. So there you go. Right there, you have an example of pre-birth of Christ Trinitarianism. May not have been the mainstream view, and the binitarian views in ancient Judaism definitely varied between Orthodox and not so Orthodox, but we cut these guys some more slack because we kind of have to. Like, they did not have the full light of Scripture that we do, or we have a fuller understanding of Scripture because of the New Testament. And many mysteries were not known to them at that time. And to us, the New Testament, the New Testament baffles us in many ways, and there's many mysteries there which will be revealed when the fullness of the eschaton is reached. And so some Jews thought there would be two messiahs, a priestly messiah and a warrior kingly messiah, because they couldn't wrap their heads around, they weren't heretics, they were just incorrect, they just made a mistake. They couldn't wrap their heads around the priest and the king being united, because in ancient Israel system, the priesthood and the kingship are separate. They're separate offices. David's the only king that ever got the privilege of doing that. Everyone else who tried to do that got in trouble. Which is interesting, of course, because Jesus, that's a hint toward the specialness. Well, David is special because Jesus is the son of David, so it's a hint toward something greater. They subordinated demons, came up with odd theories like Lilith for the origin of demons. I don't know why they did that, and there wasn't universal agreement on that kind of thing. The Tosefta, in the Tosefta, there is a reference which refers to the practice of reporting Jews who were considering converting to Christianity or who were agreeing with some things that Christians said, including rabbis. They would be reported to the Romans, or they'd be threatened to report it to the Romans, because Christianity was illegal at this time. Romans weren't necessarily always pursuing them, particularly before 200 AD. It was more like it was left to lesser magistrates and locals. They weren't looking for you, but if you were found, you'd be eliminated, basically. Like, Christianity was illegal, and it was basically a narco-tyranny for Christians. Like, our situation today with a narco-tyranny, Christians being persecuted, conservatives, right-wingers, normal people, non-crazy people who want to live in a normal world, they have to face off tyranny. Well, that's what the strategy of keeping Jews out of Christianity was. So they created their own authoritative version of the Old Testament. Again, preserved very well. God used them to preserve it, but they made a few dishonest edits, which we can correct now. And they would not engage in honest debate. I'm getting some of this from Jewish Believers in Jesus, edited by Oscar Scarone. And they would report Christians to Romans at times. And at the very least, we know this is true from the New Testament. So they would ostracize their own. This clique of Jewish academics forming the rabbinic Jewish faction, they slowly conquered the Jewish world, getting all the other sects to comply except for a small group called the Karaites, who rejected the Talmud. But there's actually, in this book, Jewish Believers in Jesus, there's actually evidence of rabbinic Jews, elite scribes, arguing with non-rabbinic Jews who are also not Christians, who are trying to preserve the two powers in heaven. In fact, Metatron, the angel, in early rabbinic literature, seems to be related to the attempt to subvert Jesus being the angel of the Lord. In Joshua chapter 5, in Exodus 23, in Daniel, in a few places, known as the Prince of the Host, possibly the unknown angel. I know the unknown angel supposedly needed help. I do believe the angel that needed help actually was the Prince of the Host, who was Jesus, but don't worry, it's not, it sounds odd. He doesn't actually need help. There's a reason for me to think that. Basically, I'll put it this way. The same reason why the angel of Yahweh lost the fight with Jacob, same kind of reasoning. It's not Not that he can incinerate anyone. It's not like an issue. He doesn't actually need help. It just sort of, he's playing a narrative role, basically. And if you wanted to iron it out, Goku can depower himself if he wants to. I know it sounds like a silly comparison, but kinda. I mean, he's called the Cloud Rider, right? He is. That's in the Bible a few times, in the Torah in particular, the one riding on the clouds. So, anyways, I'm having fun, which is good because it's been a rough day for me. So at the time, the Pharisees were not really heretics. They believed in predestination. Many of them, probably the vast majority of them, probably even all of them, but lots of them. Very popular view, binitarian Godhead, possibly Trinitarian for some of them too. They were not wrong. Jesus said, look, listen to the Pharisees. They have things to say that are correct. Jesus said that. But don't do as the Pharisees. So the Pharisees were not heretics proper as we would know them. They were adding to the gospel, but they were not like Unitarians or occultists or anything crazy like that. So Rabbinic Judaism is a post-70 AD Bible cult that is based on a conscious attempt to rewrite the theology of Judaism. So Judaism, as we know it today, is a heresy of ancient Judaism, and Christianity is a refinement of ancient Judaism. Some of the modified ceremonial elements and the ethnic elements are ignored, unnecessary, removed, etc. It's not if a Jewish Christian, for example, an ethnic Jewish Christian today, wants to observe some of those laws, I have no problem with that. I don't think we should shame them, but that's an optional thing, and that should be more of a cultural thing. I don't think Jews do not need to follow the Old Testament law. They do not need to follow the customary laws. If they're Christians, they don't need to do. Well, I mean, Judaism is not a path to God. It's not a path to God. I'm not dual covenant, not at all. I'm just saying that someone can be proud of their Jewish heritage and be a proper, good Christian. And they can, if they like, for cultural reasons, they can observe something. That's okay. That's nothing wrong with that. I would say though that if he is eating, if he's eating with Gentiles, or if you want to call them Gentiles, right? Really, unbelievers are Gentiles, right? I don't like to use that terminology; it's inappropriate. A Jewish Christian today, he needs to eat the pork. If he has a health objection, okay, that's fine, right? If you personally think it's gross, that's fine. Yeah, no worries. Thank you. I just saw it. Thank you, Root. Appreciate that. Yeah, they were not heretics in that sense. You could argue that they were heretics because they were Judaizing, and what they did was they were antinomian and legalistic at the same time, which sounds odd, right? But the reason for that is what they're doing is they're trying to create a wall around the Torah, and that's where you get it's kind of somewhat lost in the sands of time, but in the Second Temple period, you do get Jews thinking about certain things and trying to iron out the details and the proper practices for Sabbath observance. But what you have here is a misunderstanding of the purpose of the law, and these. Well, let me roll back here because I'm rambling like Curtis Yarvin, which is what I tend to do. The Pharisees created a bunch of ridiculous, inconvenient somewhat inconvenient rules, or whatever. Or at least rabbinic Jews did later, and the Pharisees did some of this. Not all of it, some of this. It has some antecedents here. I'll move over to rabbinic Jews now, today. What they have done is create a wall around the Torah, and there's a sum of that in the Second Temple period, toward the end of the Second Temple period with the Pharisees. There is some of that where they're beginning to create a wall over the Torah, which means that they will create rules to make sure they don't violate the letter of the law, when the letter of the law was never the purpose. And here's why. Jesus says in Mark chapter 2, this is the ultimate refutation of Jesus literally believes the purpose of the system is what it does. Literally. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And to be clear, like, this sentence right here, okay, Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. But this sentence is true. This is true from the beginning. The Sabbath was made for man. Which means that ridiculous, inappropriate rules for the Sabbath, these do not apply. Like, if I'm going to, I don't know if Pharisees would do this per se, but modern Jews will not turn on their computer. They will turn on their computer before sundown or at a certain time on Friday and not turn it off because you don't have to turn it off if you don't want to. Because they don't want to light a spark. As if turning your computer on because it lights a little spark, that is now lighting a fire. Basically. It's like, you can't cook on Sabbath. Well, you probably should prepare food for Sabbath. That's probably true. But if you need to cook, does that count as work? I don't think so. Think of this. Consider the battle with the Philistines. 40 days and 40 nights. Well, the Pharisees know they're just not going to fight and they're not going to do any work on the seventh day. I think turning off electronics counted as lighting a fire. Turn it off? Well, like turning it on is I think what's counted as lighting a fire by rabbinic Judaism, basically. Even though it means you should not kindle a fire, but you're not kindling a fire to do work. What if you're cold? What if it's winter? What if it's ice cold? What if you're going to die? You light the darn fire. You do not kindle a fire for work purposes. You do not cook. Thank you. Send it to me. Send it to me. You can send it in the chat, but send it to me via DMs as well, please, if you can. The Sabbath was made for man from the beginning. They didn't understand. Like the Hebrews in King Saul's day know what they're talking about. They do, well, first of all, quite frankly, they are doing work on Saturday or on Sabbath. They have to. They have to be ready to fight. They have to be making sure fortifications are maintained. They cannot afford to. So basically, this is a life or death scenario for them, right? Now, I'm Sabbatarian. I'm pro-Sabbath. I don't mean that I'm not talking Saturday. I mean a Sabbatarian for Sundays. You need to change your behavior. You need to dedicate your day to God. You get a rest. It has to be a good day for you. Like, you shouldn't. I guess if you got to lament, you can lament, right? But it should be a day of dedicated to the Lord. It should be a day of celebration. It should be a day that is both worshipful and celebratory. And I don't, people look at what restrictions there should be differently, right? Nowhere do it would never occur to me that I couldn't, well, I would say it would occur to me. I have been thinking about it more lately, but historically it wouldn't have occurred to me. At least I'll say that. I don't think I used to be a Sabbatarian, but I definitely am now. Anyways, the Sabbath is for man. Man's not for the Sabbath. So literally, what matters with the government, right? This is like literally an analogous concept to the government, where you have, what is the correct form of government? The correct form of government is the one that works. It doesn't matter what type of government it is. It matters to some extent, but what matters is, does it work? And that, it's sort of, the Bible amazes me every time I read it, where this is a mystical belief that I have. It's a mystical belief that I have. I believe it, and I think I can justify it. But the Bible, I'm not saying it has to be true, but I think it's true. The Bible does comment on everything in the entire universe in some way, directly or indirectly. Thank you. Matthew 12:5. Thank you. That's fantastic. You literally just proved what I was saying. Thank you. That's brilliant, Root. Thank you. I appreciate that, man. That's very helpful. I'll pull it up. Is it Mark or Matthew? It's Matthew. Matt 12. That is a fantastic verse. Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? Right. So from the beginning, the entirety of the law is general equity. Like it's not like, oh, general equity theonomy is a change in the. I actually believe general equity theonomy is the original interpretation. Well, almost. I think that the almost, right? It was a much stricter application of the same thing with things that were sort of arbitrarily required, but it's very similar. Like it's functionally the same. The general equity theonomy that theonomists and I'm sympathetic towards. I would consider myself a theonomist because I am pro theonomy, but I do not believe we must do theonomy. I think that at least not in a particular way, right? Oh yeah. Yeah, those guys are a mess. The SDA might be a bit better than the Hebrew Roots, to be honest. I'm not sure. Hebrew Roots is they are Judaizers, and to my knowledge, they are generally Trinitarian, but they are still going in that culty direction, and this is the problem with SDA and Hebrew Roots. And Messianic Judaism, which is more difficult to define as we want to call that, is that they all have Judaizing tendencies, and they're all sort of part of the same sort of spectrum. They're all part of that Judaism spectrum. I probably would feel most comfortable around the Messianic Jewish movement because, as much as I am very unhappy with Michael Brown, Michael Brown does steer them away from the worst excesses. And I mean, to his credit, Michael Brown has brought many Jews to the Lord. I do believe Michael Brown is regenerate. I do believe he's a true believer. But I will say, and I'm not trying to be mean here, the stuff that I've been seeing lately has been very gnarly, and I believe he's been sinning big time here with the way he's treating fellow Christians. But, you know, God has him here for a reason, I believe, despite his very, very questionable behavior lately. I don't want to talk too ill of him. That's not the purpose of the stream. But I will say I do believe he's a brother. And because he has produced some really excellent fruit. I'm sorry for the rambliness of this live stream. But a great series of books is his 5-volume series, Answering Jewish Objections. It's excellent. I have some criticisms for it, but it is still an excellent source, and I recommend it to anyone who wants to have a pretty comprehensive, basically reference work of rabbinic arguments against our religion. Like, I don't know, but I would say it's a likely candidate for if you get those 5 volumes. It's probably if you could have one book, that probably would be what you need. Probably. Thank you, by the way. Thank you for the link, Root. I appreciate that. Yeah, this is getting boring. I didn't get to my original point, so I'm going to have to summarize it. Rabbinic Judaism, as it is today, is a heresy that developed over several centuries, where academic cliques, basically Jewish scholars situated in Judea, Syria, and Mesopotamia, used underhanded tactics such as making some slight editorial decisions in the Old Testament that were dishonest to cover up high Christology, delegitimizing the LXX, engaging in dishonest debate tactics, reporting Jews who were interested in Christianity to the Romans, and um, successfully subverted the wider Jewish world, both non-rabbinic Jew and Christian Jewish. The Jewish Church existed for several centuries. I'm relatively confident that it can be said that they lasted into the 400s, based on some Syrian writings and some early church books, the apostolic constitutions, things like that. Late 300s for some of these records. So there was still a Jewish church probably into the 400s, but eventually they died out, which is tragic. And this is important. And I'll get back to that in a sec. I'll finish the thing with rabbinic Judaism. Judaism in the era before Christ, what largely accepted a Godhead. Some were Trinitarian, some were Binitarian. There were various views on this. Some were more Orthodox, some were less Orthodox. We cut the less Orthodox guys slack. They couldn't know better before the New Testament. But generally, ancient Judaism is in greater alignment with Christianity theologically than Rabbinic Judaism is. Rabbinic Judaism is a deviation of the Bible, just as Islam is after Islam, or after Judaism. And the thing that I want... Oh, shoot. Give me a sec. I'm trying to remember... There was a segue that was interesting. Let's see here. Yeah, my bad. You can speak, Rude, if you want to. I'm trying to remember what it was. I was going to go on a segue, then I killed my segue. I'm going to do this a lot. When I live stream, I'm going to be mad rambly. I'm going to be a rambly madman. So... Rabbinic Judaism, it's not Islam. It might be related to Rabbinic Judaism, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. So, let's see here. Trying to think. I could end the stream now, but I don't really want to. I'm gonna let me check the dashboard here. I could go back to Pannenberg, maybe. No. There's something else I wanted to do. Just give me a moment. I'm gonna be right back. I'll be right back. I'm gonna take a break for a moment, and I'll be back soon. Aren't you glad I didn't say banana? Alright, let me check my messages. Thank you. What is this?
I'm so sorry, Sadik. I forgot to turn off your lights before Shabbos.
Oh, yeah, that's funny. Thank you. We can goof around for a moment. He's gonna do on Singer to tomorrow. Okay, maybe I'll have to note it. I'll have to check on that. I'll have to check what I don't know, man. I might not be able to make it, but I hope so. Maybe I can make it to Anthony Rogers' stream tomorrow.
I'm so sorry, Sadik. I forgot to turn off your lights before Shabbos. But, come, let's play the Switch game. Ready?
No, it's Shabbos.
Meet Kosher Switch, patented technology endorsed by leading poskim and Orthodox rabbis, facilitating the on-demand control of electricity on Shabbat while making Chilul Shabbos impossible. Anyone who's observant experiences frustrations with electricity on Shabbat and Yom Tov. During one Shabbat, when the timer, the ubiquitous Shabbos clock, prematurely decided that dinner was over, I sat in the dark and thought, it's the 21st century, there's got to be a better way. Using my tech background, I was zoche to invent a method that leverages technology to enhance the observance and enjoyment of Shabbat. That's how Kosher Switch was born. Kosher Switch is not a grumma or indirect causation device. It's actually an ungrumma switch. It lets us have lights on or off as needed, instead of scrambling to predict those needs minutes before Shabbat. Kosher Switch reinforces a religious lifestyle that's also environmentally friendly by curbing needlessly wasted electricity. It also eliminates the accidental use of traditional light switches. Through its ease of use, Kosher Switch makes Sabbath observance attainable and maintainable by the masses. It also...
So, that's interesting. It's not attainable by the masses. That's so funny. Like it's like, so you're saying it's not attainable by the masses. That's not good. See, I think ancient Israelite religion, Yahwism, the law of Moses was general equity with, slightly nuanced that, not quite, but almost just general equity. All right, let me see what you wrote. I would have thought the Jewish church would have merged with the Gentile church, especially after Christianity became legal. It did, but so it did. Okay. Thank you. I am streaming it. I'll stream the rest in a moment. It is funny. You're right. So it was absorbed in the West. The Jewish diaspora did fade. In the East, it was more. It was in the East actually. So the East is complicated, right? Because the Jewish church is also melded with the general Semitic-speaking church, and there's a spectrum. There is actual separate. A lot of this is by inference. There's some evidence of this. There were probably somewhat separate, semi-separate Christian synagogues, but it's when I say the Jewish church, I'm meaning a particular contingent of the Church of the East. So the Church of the East was quartodeciman, which means that they did Sabbath on Saturday. They were largely the Church of the East, both Jewish and non-Jewish Semitic. Were Saturday Sabbatarians. They were quartodecimans. Most of them. This is largely, and it was unified in 325, which is not a thing that's wrong in and of itself, but I do believe it was a historical mistake. And I think that by unifying the Sabbath, that probably really confused and alienated a lot of the Church of the East. And so I think that did contribute to the destruction of the Jewish church, but I think it was probably more the rabbinic efforts. It wasn't because the Jewish church was fighting with the rabbis. They lost the battle. They were defeated, basically, over several centuries. There was basically no coordination other than a few, statistically speaking, was there cooperation between the Jewish church and the Greek and Latin churches? Yes, statistically there had to have been some, because there's going to be individuals, there's going to be people who are in the periphery, who can speak both languages, who end up finding Jewish Christian friends, and so you're going to have, on some level, statistically, yes, there had to have been some cooperation with the non-Jewish and the Jewish church in that period of time, but there was nothing even remotely organized at all. It was, the communication was not good, basically. And so you have Jewish church, which is kind of on its own, and they're not going to be as organized. They're much less organized than these rabbinic cliques. Eventually, they faded away. Exact date when the last ones are gone, no way to know that. It could have lasted. It could have lasted for more centuries in pockets, but probably it's possible. I don't think it did. It's just technically possible. Anyways, yeah, we'll continue the video.
Also mitigates the prohibitions involving the often misused Shabbos goy.
Excuse me, ma'am. Hi, I need a big favor. My bedroom, the lights are on, so I was wondering if maybe you could come up to my bedroom and...
Is this a parody? Is this a parody? I think these actually are Jewish people. Like, I don't think it's Coaster Switch via lunch. Oh no, it really is. Oh no, it really is a product. Okay.
I ain't coming up to your bedroom.
Yeah, but the lights are on.
You're crazy.
But techno-halachic innovation is useless unless it also conforms with Jewish law. That's why we sought to validate Kosher Switch's halachic feasibility from day one. During years of R&D, we've been privileged to meet with Torah giants who have analyzed, endorsed, and blessed our technology and endeavors.
It is clear this is not a...
The sorcerers in the tower, they've examined this technology. They've determined that it is that it will not upset the heavens. And they blessed it. This technology is kosher, I'm losing my train of thought again.
Grome, Mitzat Hilchei Shabbos, there's no question of any malacha being done by using that switch. In Mitzat Hasheni, I recommend that anyone asks their own Rav to find out whether it is within the spirit of Shabbos, although there is no real malacha.
There has endorsements from many poskim regarding the kosher switch. So I wish him הצלחה, ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשי ידיו.
ואני כבר בדקתי אותו וראיתי. ולפי דעתי, לא רק שזה מותר, גם אתה מצווה לך להפיץ את זה ברבים.
Now they even have a kosher switch. Kosher switch. You can turn the lights on Shabbat now.
מנה שקלטתי, שתברכו פינון אומר שזה גם קשה למהדרין.
I was mesmerized to be blessed to see such an invention in my lifetime.
But can the kosher switch really be kosher? It's clear why using it is permissible once we take a closer look inside.
The kosher switch is easy to use. We'll start in normal mode with the kosher switch on-off button in its off or down position. The kosher switch button isn't attached to anything electrical. Its sole purpose is to block or unblock an internally emitted light pulse. The pulse is currently blocked. When the kosher switch button is in the on position, the pulse is unblocked and the switch turns the room light on. Before Shabbat, simply slide the mode selection switch to Sabbath mode. Now the patented kosher switch technology...
This is esoteric buttons. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it is pretty funny. It's an Indiegogo campaign. So it's like, oh, here's our new product so we can trick God.
Comes to life.
You don't have to do any of this nonsense. Israelites did not have to... again, if the Hebrews had to follow rules like this, they would have just been trounced by the Philistines. And you sent me Matthew 12. Or have you not read the law or have you not read in the law how the Sabbath, the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? Because you could, it's general equity. It was always general equity, with some caveats to that.
The green status light provides absolute assurance that there are no active internal light pulses. In reality, we're only moving an isolated piece of plastic. Just wait for the green and flick the kosher switch. When the red status light is about to change back to green, a single internal light pulse may be emitted, subject to a random degree of uncertainty. In this cycle, the pulse failed to emit altogether. Even when a pulse is successfully emitted, the ability for the pulse to be received is also subject to a random degree of uncertainty. Finally, the pulse is successfully received, and the kosher switch turns on the room light. The kosher switch is therefore permitted for consumer use, since all we've done is move a single, isolated piece of plastic.
We've spent years developing and enhancing the kosher switch while beta testing it in dozens of homes, institutions, and synagogues. Our latest milestone was obtaining UL certification. Now we're ready for mass production, but we need your help to meet our factory's minimum quantity requirements. By backing us, you're supporting this long overdue techno-halachic breakthrough and are making kosher switch a reality. So join us and spread the word. Together, we can improve the world one kosher switch at a time.
I have to send that to my buddy. He'll get a kick out of this. Oh man, that's funny. I think I'm gonna call quits, and maybe I will cut out all the junk because this is a long video with a bunch of Randley stuff. Let's see, let's yeah, they do like to trick God. Again, you save your ass falls in a hole. You save your ass, your donkey. Of course, is what I mean. It's like, you shall not kindle a fire. Okay, for the purposes of work. What if your kids are cold and they could freeze to death? God's not going to say, well, you can't light a fire. No, light a fire. God has no problem with that. Do I have a new viewer on Twitter? Hello? New viewer? You there? Probably just someone who showed up. Well, let's see here. Alright, well, I'm going to call it a night. I'm gonna try to do a better live stream, hopefully, because I'm all over the place and have no organization, and a lot of this is on memory. Anyways, take it easy.